Before we begin tonight's journey into one of the most carefully guarded secrets of the modern age, I want to ask for your support. If you're enjoying this content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps the channel more than you could possibly know and allows us to keep bringing you these deep dives into the unknown. If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review makes an enormous difference, and we truly appreciate it. And if you'd like, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing our global community and knowing that someone in Tokyo might be starting their morning while someone in London is drifting off to sleep, all tuning into the same mystery. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider subscribing. It means everything. Tonight's story comes thanks to incredible suggestions from Todd Rockwell, Wild MT, One, Mary Meyer, and Stuart. Thank you all for this. Fascinating topic. Now, let's begin. There are wars that history remembers with clarity. Battles fought over land, ideology, resources. The reasons are documented, debated, and eventually understood. But then there are conflicts that leave behind a different kind of residue. Not answers, but questions. Not closure, but silence. The kind of silence that grows heavier with each passing year, as if the very absence of explanation becomes its own form of evidence. In the early 2000s, the world watched as one such conflict unfolded. Military forces moved across ancient landscapes with precision and speed. Official narratives were provided, accepted by some, questioned by others. But beneath the surface of public discourse, another story began to circulate. Not in mainstream media, but in the whispered conversations of researchers, theorists, and those who claimed access to information that would never see official daylight. The rumour was simple in its claim, yet staggering in its implications. Something had been discovered beneath the sands of the Middle East. Not weapons of mass destruction, not oil reserves or strategic military positions. Something far older. Something that predated modern civilization itself. And according to those who believed, something that powerful nations would do anything to control, contain, or keep hidden from the world. This is the story of the Gate Beneath the Sand. Chapter 1. Ancient Gates in Forgotten Texts. Long before the modern nations of the Middle East drew their borders, long before Islam or Christianity shaped the spiritual landscape of the region, there existed a civilization that would become the foundation of human culture itself. Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the cradle where writing, law, astronomy and agriculture first took root in forms we would recognize today. But the ancient peoples of this region left behind more than practical innovations. They left stories, thousands of clay, tablets, painstakingly inscribed with cuneiform script, describing a world far stranger than the one we think we know. Among these texts are descriptions that have puzzled scholars for over a century. References to gates that were not merely architectural features but portals. Doorways that connected the realm of gods with the realm of humans. In Sumerian mythology, these were known by various names, but always with the same essential quality. They were passages between worlds. The Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, speaks of Tiamat and Marduk, of cosmic battles and the formation of the heavens and earth. But within these grand narratives are smaller, stranger details, descriptions of structures that served as meeting places between divine beings and mortal priests, locations where, according to the texts, gods descended from the heavens to walk among humanity. For traditional archaeology, these stories are mythology, symbolic representations of natural phenomena, theological concepts given narrative form. The gates are metaphors. The descending gods are allegories for the movement of celestial bodies or the changing seasons. But what if interpretation has been backwards all along? The conspiracy theory posits a different approach to these ancient texts. What if the people of Mesopotamia were not creating poetic metaphors, but attempting to describe technology so advanced that their language had no proper words for it? What if the gates they described were actual physical structures, and the beings who used them were not gods in a supernatural sense, but visitors from somewhere else entirely? Consider the precision with which these texts describe certain rituals and procedures, the exact positioning of objects, the specific timing of ceremonies, the elaborate protocols for approaching these sacred sites. Do these read more like religious mysticism or technical instructions translated through the lens of primitive understanding? One tablet, fragment housed in the British Museum, describes a gate of the gods in troubling detail. It speaks of a surface that reflected no light, yet glowed with its own radiance, of symbols arranged in circles that would activate in sequence, of a threshold that, when crossed, would lead not to another room, but to another place entirely. The text warns that only those properly prepared could survive passage through the gate. All others would be consumed. The language is archaic, the grammar fragmented by time and damage to the tablet itself. But the message beneath the ancient words carries an unmistakable weight. This was not metaphor. This was warning. As archaeological understanding of Mesopotamia grew throughout the 20th century, certain patterns became impossible to ignore. Major Sumerian and Babylonian cities were not built randomly across the landscape. They were positioned with mathematical precision, aligned to astronomical phenomena in ways that suggested sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics. More intriguing still were the underground chambers discovered beneath several of these sites. Vast spaces carved from solid rock, their walls smooth and featureless, their purposes unclear. Official archaeology labelled them storage facilities, grain silos or religious sanctuaries. But the theories that began to form in alternative research communities suggested something else entirely. These chambers, some argued, were not built to store grain or worship gods. They were built to house something, to contain it, to keep it separate from the world above while preventing its complete destruction. And according to the conspiracy theory that would eventually lead to modern military intervention, at least one of these chambers still held its original occupant. Not a religious idol or ancient treasure, but a functional gate. A doorway that still worked after thousands of years buried beneath sand and time. The ancient texts had not been myth after all. They had been maintenance logs, operating manuals, historical records of technology that predated human civilization as we understand it. And if such technology existed, if it truly lay buried beneath the cradle of civilization, then certain questions became inevitable. Who built it? When? For what purpose? And most critically, who would control it if it were ever found? Chapter 2. The Land Where Civilization Began. Modern Iraq occupies territory that once held the greatest cities of the ancient world: Ur, Uruk, Babylon, Nineveh. Names that echo through history with a weight that few modern cities can match. This was not merely land that civilization passed through. This was where it began. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers created conditions perfect for agriculture, allowing permanent settlements to form and grow. Writing emerged here, first as simple inventory marks, then evolving into the sophisticated cuneiform script that would record everything from business transactions to epic poetry, mathematics, astronomy, the concept of law codes, the wheel itself, all have roots in this region. But for those investigating the Stargate conspiracy, the significance of Mesopotamia goes beyond its role as civilization's birthplace. The theory suggests this was a chosen location, that the same factors that made it ideal for human civilization made it valuable for something else entirely. The geography itself becomes evidence in this interpretation. A land between rivers situated at the crossroads of three continents, accessible yet defensible. A place where, thousands of years ago, something could be installed, used, and eventually hidden with a reasonable certainty that it would remain undisturbed through the rise and fall of empires. Archaeological records show that major sites in Iraq have been disturbed repeatedly throughout history. Alexander the Great marched through Babylon. Roman expeditions reached Mesopotamia. Islamic scholars of the medieval period showed interest in pre-Islamic ruins. European archaeologists of the 19th and 20th centuries excavated extensively. Yet according to the conspiracy theory, none of these groups found what they were truly looking for. They excavated temples and palaces, recovered tablets and artwork, but the deepest chambers remained sealed, either through ignorance of what lay below, or through deliberate misdirection by those who knew the truth. Documents that emerged in the late 20th century, dismissed as forgeries by mainstream academics, suggested that certain sites in Iraq had been marked with warning symbols by ancient civilizations, not to indicate treasure or religious significance, but to warn future generations away. The symbols allegedly indicated locations that should remain undisturbed. One such document, supposedly translated from fragments found in a private collection, describes a site near ancient Uruk. The text warns that beneath the city's foundations lies a gate that must never be opened, that attempting to cross its threshold brings madness and death, that the gate itself hungers for passage and must be kept eternally sealed. Official archaeology has no record of such a document. No museum claims it in their collection. No peer-reviewed journal has published its contents. But in the conspiracy research community, references to this warning appear again and again, always second-hand, always unverifiable, yet oddly consistent in their details. By the late 20th century, Iraq had become a nation increasingly isolated from the Western world. Political tensions, conflicts, sanctions. But even during periods of isolation, certain activities continued beneath official notice. Archaeological surveys conducted by foreign teams under the cover of academic research. Satellite imagery analysed for geometric patterns beneath the sand. Quiet inquiries made about ancient texts held in private collections. Someone was looking for something, and, according to the theory, they eventually found it. The discovery, if it occurred, would have been made quietly. No press releases, no academic papers, just a careful notation in a classified file somewhere, marking coordinates and describing an anomaly, a structure beneath the earth that matched no known construction technique, made of materials that should not exist in that time and place, arranged in a pattern that suggested purpose beyond human architecture. And if such a structure were found, if it matched the descriptions in ancient texts, then certain decisions would need to be made, about disclosure, about control, about what happens when mythology becomes archaeology, and archaeology becomes a national security concern. The land where civilization began was about to become the centre of something much larger than politics or oil. It was about to become ground zero for a question that could redefine human history itself. What was buried beneath the sand, and what would happen if someone tried to use it? Chapter 3. A leader obsessed with the past. Saddam Hussein's fascination with ancient Babylon is a matter of historical record. Unlike many aspects of the Stargate conspiracy theory, this part requires no speculation. The evidence exists in stone, brick, and documented public works. Beginning in the 1980s, Saddam initiated an ambitious reconstruction project at the ancient site of Babylon. Walls were rebuilt, structures were restored, often using modern bricks stamped with his name, alongside those of ancient King Nebuchadnezzar. It was, by all official accounts, an exercise in nationalism, a way of connecting modern Iraq to its glorious past, positioning Saddam as the inheritor of Mesopotamian greatness. But those investigating the deeper conspiracy noted troubling details in how this reconstruction proceeded. Certain areas of the site were rebuilt extensively, while others were left deliberately untouched. Excavations would begin, proceed to a certain depth, then suddenly halt and be filled in again. Foreign archaeologists invited to assist with the project would find themselves barred from specific locations without explanation. One German archaeological team, working at Babylon in the mid-1980s, later reported strange restrictions during their tenure. They were told certain underground chambers were structurally unsafe and off-limits. Yet those same chambers were guarded by military personnel, an unusual precaution for sections deemed merely dangerous due to structural concerns. When the team leader inquired about what might be stored in these restricted areas, his questions were met with a polite but firm suggestion that curiosity had limits in Saddam's Iraq. The official explanation for military presence at archaeological sites was protection against looters. Iraq's ancient heritage had long been vulnerable to theft, with artifacts making their way onto black markets worldwide. But the level of security at certain locations seemed excessive for guarding pottery and tablets. Saddam's personal interest in Babylonian history went beyond public restoration projects. Former members of his inner circle, those who later fled Iraq and spoke to Western intelligence agencies, described private meetings where ancient texts were discussed, not as historical curiosities, but as potential sources of practical knowledge. One account, never fully verified but cited repeatedly in conspiracy literature, describes a meeting in the early 1990s. Saddam allegedly questioned scholars about Sumerian references to gates and thresholds. He wanted to know if these were metaphorical or literal. If literal, he wanted to know if any such structures had been located, and if located, he wanted to know if they could be made operational. The scholars, according to this account, gave cautious answers. They spoke of mythology, of symbolism, of the difficulty of interpreting ancient texts, but Saddam pressed them. He insisted there was reality beneath the mythology. He claimed to have evidence. What evidence? The account does not specify, but in the conspiracy theories framework, the implication is clear. Saddam had found something, or someone had found something and brought it to his attention, and his reconstruction efforts at Babylon were not about national pride, they were about access. Consider the timeline. Reconstruction begins in the early 1980s. By the late 1980s, Saddam's regime was pursuing advanced weapons programs with unusual urgency. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, a nuclear program that attracted international attention and sanctions. Official history frames these as the actions of an aggressive dictator seeking regional dominance. But the conspiracy theory suggests an additional motivation. If Saddam believed he had access to technology beyond conventional weapons, if he thought the gates described in ancient texts were real and functional, then his pursuit of modern weapons might have been a cover, a way to explain his true research interests without revealing what he was actually seeking. By the early 2000s, Saddam's government had become increasingly secretive about archaeological sites. Foreign access was severely limited. Satellite imagery showed unusual activity at locations with no obvious strategic value. Thermal sensors detected underground construction in areas supposedly devoid of modern development. Western intelligence agencies noticed. Reports were filed. Analysts tried to make sense of patterns that did not fit standard military or weapons program indicators, and some of those analysts, working from fragmentary information and ancient mythology taken literally, began to form a theory that would sound insane to outsiders. Saddam Hussein was not just pursuing weapons of mass destruction, he was pursuing something much older, much more dangerous, and if the theory was correct, he might be close to activating it. The question became not whether to intervene, but how to justify intervention based on evidence that could never be made public. Chapter 4. Cold War Experiments That Went Too Far. In the decades following World War II, the United States and Soviet Union engaged in a competition that extended far beyond conventional military might. It was a race for knowledge, for advantage in any domain that might provide an edge, and some of those domains existed in territories science had barely begun to map. The Stargate project is not conspiracy theory. It is documented fact. Beginning in the 1970s and continuing through the 1990s, the United States government funded research into remote viewing, psychic phenomena, and the potential military applications of consciousness itself. The program had various names over its lifetime, but Stargate became the most widely known. The official narrative describes Stargate as an experiment in perception. Could trained individuals gather intelligence about distant locations through mental focus alone? Could consciousness transcend the normal limitations of space and time? The results, according to declassified documents, were mixed. Some sessions produced information that seemed impossibly accurate. Others produced nothing useful. After decades of research and millions in funding, the program was officially terminated, deemed insufficiently reliable for operational use. But this official conclusion, conspiracy theorists argue, represents only the surface of what Stargate actually accomplished. The program's real discoveries, they claim, were classified at levels far beyond what has been publicly released, and those discoveries changed everything. Consider what remote viewing suggested, even in its acknowledged form, that consciousness could, under certain conditions, perceive locations and events separated by vast distances, that the mind was not entirely bound by the physical location of the brain. That information could be accessed through means beyond the conventional senses. If consciousness could perceive across distance, the next logical question was inevitable. Could it project across distance? Could consciousness not merely observe a remote location, but manifest there in some meaningful way? And if consciousness could be projected, could physical matter follow? This is where official history and conspiracy theory diverge completely. The declassified Stargate documents say nothing about attempts at physical projection, but alternative researchers point to gaps in the timeline, to funding that continued even after the program was supposedly shut down, to facilities that remained operational with no official purpose. One persistent theory suggests that Stargate researchers made contact with something during their experiments, not merely viewing distant locations, but perceiving distant intelligences, entities that existed in different spaces, or different times, or different dimensions entirely. And these entities, according to the theory, indicated that physical gateways between locations were possible, not through consciousness alone, but through technology. The researchers allegedly learned that such gateways had existed before, that ancient civilizations had either built them or discovered them, that the gates had been used, then sealed, then lost to history. But if the gates had been real once, they could be found again, and if found, they might be reactivated. This is where the conspiracy theory connects Cold War psychic research to ancient Mesopotamian archaeology. The Stargate program, according to this interpretation, was never just about remote viewing. It was about finding the physical gates that ancient texts described, and once found, understanding how to use them. Documents that occasionally surface on conspiracy forums, always of questionable authenticity, describe experiments that allegedly went wrong, attempts to establish contact through discovered gateways that resulted in equipment failures, personnel disappearing, or worse. Strange effects described in clinical language, localized distortions in time perception, interference with electronic equipment, psychological changes in personnel who approached active gates. One such document, supposedly leaked from a defense contractor, describes a test conducted in the late 1980s. A team attempted to activate a structure discovered during archaeological excavations in a location that is redacted in the document. The activation procedure was based on translations of ancient texts, combined with insights gained through remote viewing sessions. According to this account, the activation succeeded. The gate opened, and something came through. The document describes the next several hours in fragmented, almost panicked language. Personnel unable to communicate with the observation team, equipment, registering readings that made no physical sense, and a presence that was intelligent, hostile, and seemingly capable of affecting reality itself through thought alone. The gate was shut down, the site was sealed. The entire program was allegedly restructured, with new priorities focused not on using the gates, but on ensuring they remained closed. Because whatever was on the other side, humanity was not ready to meet it. Whether such documents are genuine or fabrications created by skilled hoaxers, their existence has shaped the narrative of the Stargate conspiracy. They suggest a progression from Cold War research into consciousness, to the discovery that consciousness could lead to something physical, to the horrifying realization that some doors were sealed for good reason. And they suggest that by the early 2000s, certain agencies within the United States government had very specific knowledge about what was buried in Iraq, knowledge that would make securing those sites a priority above all others. Chapter 5. The Artifact That Could Not Be Moved. According to conspiracy theory, the discovery occurred sometime in the late 1990s. The exact date varies depending on the source, but the details remain remarkably consistent across different accounts. A structure was found beneath layers of sand and stone in southern Iraq, near the ruins of ancient Uruk. The structure was circular, approximately 10 meters in diameter. The material defied easy classification. It appeared metallic, but did not match any known alloy. It showed no signs of corrosion despite presumably being buried for thousands of years. Its surface was covered with symbols arranged in concentric circles, each symbol distinct yet part of a larger pattern. Initial analysis was conducted by a team that supposedly included archaeologists, materials scientists, and intelligence personnel. Their findings raised more questions than answers. The structure was not Sumerian, Babylonian, or from any other known Mesopotamian civilization. Its construction technique was unlike anything in the archaeological record, and most troublingly, it appeared to be functional, not a relic or monument, but a device. Attempts to move the structure failed, not because of its weight, though it was certainly massive, but because it seemed fundamentally anchored to its location. Equipment brought in to extract it would malfunction when brought too close. Cutting tools would lose their edge. Electronic systems would experience interference. It was as if the structure itself resisted removal. This resistance suggested something beyond passive physical properties. The structure, some theorists claimed, was connected to the Earth in ways that could not be severed, perhaps drawing energy from the planet itself, perhaps serving as an anchor point for something that required absolute stability, or perhaps simply designed never to be portable, to remain exactly where it was placed by whoever built it. The symbols covering its surface became the focus of intensive study. They did not match any known ancient language, yet their arrangement suggested meaning. Patterns within patterns, mathematical relationships. Some researchers noted similarities to astronomical configurations, as if the symbols mapped celestial positions from a perspective not available on Earth. One translation attempt, supposedly based on fragments found in classified Sumerian texts, suggested the symbols were not language at all but coordinates, addresses, specific locations in space, or time, or dimensions beyond normal perception. And the arrangement of symbols in circles suggested a selection mechanism, a way to choose a destination. This interpretation transformed the structure from ancient artifact to functional technology. If the symbols were coordinates, then the structure was a gateway, a portal that could be programmed to open to specific locations, and if the translations were accurate, some of those locations were not merely distant but fundamentally alien to human understanding. Attempts to test this theory were conducted according to leaked accounts. Small-scale experiments trying to activate individual symbols, most resulted in no response, but some produced effects that were carefully documented and immediately classified. Localized temperature changes, electromagnetic pulses, and in one case, a brief visual distortion that observers described as looking into a space that did not follow normal geometric rules. The program conducting these experiments was allegedly placed under strict containment protocols after that visual distortion event. No further activation attempts were authorized. The structure was to be studied, documented, but not used. Its existence was to be kept from both the public and most levels of government, and most critically, it was to be prevented from falling into hostile hands. This last concern became paramount as intelligence agencies tracked Saddam Hussein's interest in Mesopotamian sites. If Saddam knew about the structure, if his own researchers had discovered it, or learned of its location through ancient texts, then he might attempt to access it, or worse, attempt to use it. The problem was straightforward in its complexity. The structure could not be moved. It could not be destroyed without risking catastrophic side effects, as the failed removal attempt suggested it was connected to fundamental properties of its location. But neither could it be left in a nation increasingly hostile to Western interests, governed by a leader whose actions had become erratic and aggressive. The solution, according to the conspiracy theory, was invasion. Not for oil, not for weapons of mass destruction, but to secure control of a site that represented the most significant discovery in human history. A working gateway to elsewhere, buried beneath the cradle of civilization, but such an invasion required justification, public reasoning, a narrative that would satisfy international community and domestic populations, something tangible and threatening. Weapons of mass destruction would serve that purpose. Whether they existed or not was secondary to the real objective. The invasion would happen regardless. The weapons were simply the story told while the real mission unfolded in silence. Chapter 6. The Invasion Revisited. When military operations began in Iraq in 2003, the world watched a conflict explained through the lens of national security and counter-terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, links to terrorist organisations, the need to remove a dangerous dictator from power. These were the reasons provided, debated, accepted or rejected by observers worldwide. But conspiracy theorists studying the invasion noted unusual aspects to the military campaign. Certain locations were secured early and prioritised heavily, despite having no obvious strategic value. Archaeological sites received protection that seemed disproportionate to their role in active combat, and specialised teams, not part of standard military units, were deployed to specific coordinates with missions that were never made public. Consider the speed with which coalition forces moved toward particular sites in southern Iraq. Official military doctrine would suggest securing major cities, infrastructure, and known military installations first. But the actual pattern of advancement prioritised certain ruins, ancient locations with no modern military significance. One such site was near ancient Uruk. Military units established a perimeter around the area within days of the invasion beginning. Civilian access was prohibited. Even embedded journalists travelling with military units to document the war were kept away from this zone. When questions were raised about the heavy security at what appeared to be empty desert, official explanations cited unexploded, ordnance concerns or potential chemical weapon storage. But former military personnel, speaking years later on condition of anonymity, described a different reality. They spoke of specialised equipment being brought to the site, of excavation work conducted under heavy guard, of areas that were off limits even to most military personnel, accessible only to individuals with security clearances far beyond standard combat operations. One account describes a perimeter guard detail assigned to the site for several weeks. The individuals providing this account reported seeing no combat action, no evidence of weapons, nothing that explained why this particular patch of desert required such intense security. What they did see were cargo containers being brought in at night, scientific equipment, and personnel who arrived via unmarked aircraft and went directly into underground structures without interacting with regular military units. These personnel, according to multiple accounts, were not conducting weapons inspections. They were not searching for chemical or biological threats. They were working with something already known to be there, something that required specialists with knowledge far removed from conventional military expertise. Archaeological teams were indeed embedded with military units during the invasion. This was publicly acknowledged, framed as an effort to protect Iraq's cultural heritage from looters and collateral damage. But the scale of this protection raised questions. Museums received guards. Important ruins were cordoned off. Yet hospitals and infrastructure sometimes received less immediate attention. The conspiracy theory suggests a dual purpose for these archaeological protection efforts. On one level, they genuinely sought to prevent looting. Iraq's archaeological treasures had immense historical value. But on another level, they provided cover for securing specific sites that held secrets beyond historical significance. Certain locations were not merely protected but excavated further during and immediately after the initial invasion. Ground-penetrating radar was used to map underground structures. Drilling equipment was brought in to create access shafts. And in at least one case, according to classified reports that later appeared in leaked document collections, a chamber was breached that had been sealed for thousands of years. What was found in that chamber remains disputed even within conspiracy circles. Some theories suggest it was the gate structure itself, finally accessed by those who knew what they were looking for. Others propose it was a related chamber, a control room, or storage facility associated with the gate. But all accounts agree that whatever was found was immediately classified at the highest levels. In the months following the invasion, as the search for weapons of mass destruction yielded nothing, public narrative began to shift. The reasons for war were reassessed, justified on other grounds. But quietly, away from media attention, certain sites in Iraq remained under permanent military control, not because they held weapons, but because they held something that could not be publicly acknowledged. The theory suggests that the invasion of Iraq was, at its core, an archaeological mission disguised as a military campaign, that the stated objectives were manufactured justifications for securing control of sites that might contain functioning ancient technology, and that the soldiers, journalists, and even most government officials were unaware of the real reasons their nation had gone to war. This level of deception would require extraordinary justification. But for those who believed in the existence of ancient gateways, the justification was simple. If such technology existed, if it worked, then controlling it was worth any cost, because whoever controlled the gates controlled access to possibilities beyond human understanding. Chapter 7. Silence. After. When the weapons of mass destruction were not found, when inspections yielded none of the chemical, biological or nuclear programs that had been declared imminent threats, the narrative shifted. Mistakes were acknowledged. Intelligence had been flawed. Assumptions had been incorrect. The reasons for war were re-examined, debated and judged by history. But in the years that followed, certain facts remained curiously absent from these debates. Discussions about failed intelligence focused on conventional weapons programs. Questions about justifications centered on political decisions and diplomatic failures. What was never discussed publicly were the sites that remained under permanent military control long after major combat operations ended. Archaeological locations in southern Iraq became restricted zones. Officially, this was explained as protection for sites vulnerable to looting in the post-war chaos. Iraq's cultural heritage needed safeguarding. International agreements supported this protection, but the level of security at some locations suggested concerns beyond artifact theft. Journalists who attempted to visit these protected archaeological sites were turned away. Researchers seeking access for legitimate academic purposes found their requests denied or endlessly delayed. The areas were off limits, patrolled by security forces, and monitored with technology far beyond what would be necessary to prevent looting. Former military personnel who served in Iraq during the occupation period occasionally spoke about these restricted zones, though always carefully and often anonymously. They describe locations where even soldiers with significant security clearances were prohibited, where helicopter flights were redirected to avoid airspace over certain coordinates, where asking questions about what was being protected would earn stern warnings about operational security. One account, published in an alternative news forum and never verified, described a conversation between soldiers stationed near one such restricted site. They had been told the area contained unexploded ordnance, but no disposal teams arrived to clear it. Instead, the site remained cordoned off, with security increasing rather than decreasing over time. When one soldier suggested that the ordnance story was false, his companion replied that obviously it was false, but asking what the truth might be was not encouraged. Satellite imagery of these sites, available through commercial services, showed interesting patterns. In some cases, structures were built over archaeological locations, permanent installations that remained operational years after the official end of combat. But the buildings were not typical military facilities. They lacked the characteristics of bases or forward operating posts. They were research installations, positioned over locations of ancient significance. The conspiracy theory interprets this ongoing presence as evidence of continued investigation. The gates, if they existed, were too important to abandon. Research into their function, their origin, their potential applications would have continued regardless of public knowledge about the war's justification. The sites had been secured. The real work could proceed in silence, but along with continued investigation came signs of caution. Multiple accounts reference incidents at these restricted sites, equipment malfunctions, personnel experiencing psychological distress, events that required medical evacuation and subsequent assignment to different units. The pattern suggested something at these locations was not merely being studied, but was actively resisting that study. One leaked medical report, supposedly from a military hospital treating personnel evacuated from restricted archaeological sites, described symptoms consistent with exposure to electromagnetic fields of unusual frequency. But the report also noted psychological effects that did not fit standard radiation exposure models. Patients reported perceiving spaces that should not exist. hearing sounds that recording equipment did not capture, experiencing time differently than their colleagues. These symptoms were officially attributed to stress, environmental factors, or pre-existing conditions. But the pattern of similar reports coming from different restricted sites suggested a common cause. Something present at these locations was affecting human perception in ways that conventional medicine could not explain. As years passed, the restricted sites remained restricted. No dramatic revelations emerged. No disclosure event occurred. The gates, if they existed, remained a secret kept from the public and most government officials. But within certain intelligence and military circles, according to the conspiracy theory, knowledge of what had been found became foundational to strategic planning. Future conflicts in the Middle East would be evaluated not just on conventional strategic grounds, but on their proximity to sites of archaeological significance. Regime stability would be assessed partly on whether governments could be trusted to maintain secrecy about ancient discoveries. And research budgets hidden within Black Program funding would continue to support investigation into technology that officially did not exist. The silence after the invasion was not the silence of failed policy or acknowledged mistakes. It was the silence of successful secrecy. The real objective had been achieved. The sites were secured, the gates were contained, and the world remained unaware that human history had been rewritten in the depths of Iraqi excavations. Chapter 8. What happens when a gate is opened? The theories about what occurred during alleged activation attempts vary in their details, but they share a common thread of catastrophe narrowly avoided. These are not official accounts. They exist only in leaked documents of questionable authenticity, anonymous testimonies, and the speculations of researchers who claim access to insider information. But their consistency across multiple sources suggests either coordinated fabrication or multiple witnesses to the same disturbing events. The earliest activation attempt supposedly occurred in the late 1990s, before the invasion, during an operation conducted by Iraqi researchers under Saddam's direction. According to this account, the team had translated enough of the gate symbols to attempt a basic activation sequence. They had studied the structure, documented its properties, and believed they understood the fundamental principles of its operation. The activation was partial. The gate did not fully open, but something changed. Witnesses described the air around the structure becoming thick, resistant to movement, as if space itself had become viscous. Temperature dropped dramatically. Electronic equipment began displaying impossible readings, measurements that violated known physical laws, and then there was perception of presence. Multiple witnesses, all of whom supposedly underwent extensive debriefing afterward, reported feeling that something was watching them through the partially activated gate. Not seeing anything visible, but knowing with absolute certainty that intelligence was on the other side, observing, evaluating. The Iraqi team shut down the activation attempt, but effects persisted for hours afterward. Personnel experienced disorientation, difficulty distinguishing memory from present experience, and in some cases, knowledge of information they should not possess. One researcher allegedly began speaking in Sumerian, a language he had studied but never been fluent in, describing what he called the spaces between spaces before collapsing. The incident was classified at the highest levels of Iraqi government. The team was dispersed. Further activation attempts were postponed indefinitely. But Saddam's interest did not wane. He simply became more cautious, more methodical in his approach. When coalition forces secured the site years later, they allegedly found documentation of that failed attempt, and they found evidence that Saddam had been planning another larger activation experiment, one that would commit far more resources and take far greater risks. The invasion may have prevented that experiment from occurring, but coalition forces conducted their own tests according to the conspiracy theory, more carefully monitored, with better equipment, informed by decades of research into remote viewing and consciousness studies. They wanted to understand what the gates were, where they led, and whether they could be controlled. One leaked account describes an American-led activation attempt shortly after securing the site. The team included physicists, archaeologists, and personnel with experience in the Stargate remote viewing program. They approached the activation with scientific rigour, documenting every step, every measurement, every precaution. The gate responded to their activation sequence, symbols lit with inner radiance. The centre of the circular structure began to shimmer, as if the air itself was being replaced with something else. Instruments recorded massive energy fluctuations from sources that could not be identified. And then the gate opened. What lay beyond was not darkness, and it was not light. Witnesses struggled to describe it even minutes after the event, a space that seemed to extend infinitely in directions that should not exist. Geometry that hurt to perceive, angles that implied dimensions human minds were not equipped to process, and the presence, far stronger than in previous attempts, something vast and ancient, aware and interested. The team maintained the gate open for approximately 3 minutes before shutting it down. In that time, they experienced effects that would be analysed for years afterward. Time dilation, with some team members reporting the 3 minutes felt like hours. Audio recordings capturing sounds that seemed to be words in a language that predated human speech. And most disturbing, the appearance of symbols on equipment that had not been there before, arranged in patterns that matched other ancient sites around the world. 2 members of the activation team required medical attention after the experiment. Both recovered physically, but reported persistent psychological effects. Dreams of the space beyond the gate, sense of being observed, and occasional episodes where they would speak about things they claimed to remember but had never experienced, knowledge from perspectives that were not human. The program was restructured after this incident. Future protocols mandated that gates would not be fully opened. Research would focus on understanding their construction and properties, but not on establishing active connections. The risk was deemed too high. Whatever existed on the other side of the gates, whatever intelligence used them or built them, humanity was not ready for contact. But some researchers allegedly argued for a different approach. They claimed the gates represented humanity's next evolutionary step. That fear of the unknown should not prevent exploration, that closing the gates permanently would be like early humans deciding to never leave their caves because the outside world held dangers. This debate supposedly continues in classified facilities around the world. Should the gates be destroyed, if destruction is even possible? Should they be studied but never used? Or should humanity eventually attempt passage, accepting the risks in pursuit of knowledge beyond current understanding? Meanwhile, the gates themselves remain, silent, sealed, but never quite dormant. Because according to some accounts, once a gate has been opened, even briefly, it never completely closes. A connection has been established, and something on the other side knows. We are here. Chapter 9. Why the truth could never be public. Imagine for a moment that the conspiracy theory is true, that functional ancient gateways exist, that they were found in Iraq, that they lead to places beyond human understanding. What would disclosure of such information mean for civilization as we know it? The religious implications alone would be catastrophic. Every major faith tradition includes creation narratives, explanations for humanity's place in the cosmos, frameworks for understanding existence itself. The discovery of ancient technology that predates human civilization would require complete reassessment of these narratives. Were the gates built by gods? Then gods are beings who use technology, suggesting they are not supernatural but simply vastly more advanced. This reduces divine beings to powerful entities, stripping away the transcendent nature that defines faith for billions of people. The theological foundations of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and countless other traditions would require fundamental reinterpretation. Or were the gates built by ancient human civilizations that possess technology beyond what we consider possible for their era? This suggests history, as we know it is incomplete or incorrect. That civilization has risen and fallen multiple times, that humanity may have achieved technological advancement in the deep past, then lost it through catastrophe or collapse. This challenges archaeological consensus, anthropological understanding, and our entire conception of human development. Or were the gates built by non-human intelligence? This possibility opens questions that would dominate discourse for generations. Are we alone in the universe? Have we been visited before? Are we being watched? Does our civilization exist under observation or even guidance from forces we don't acknowledge? The psychological and societal effects of such revelation would be immeasurable. Beyond religious and philosophical disruption, there are practical concerns. Nations compete for resources and strategic advantage. If gateways exist that allow travel to other locations, other times, or other dimensions, they represent power beyond any conventional weapon or technology. Control of such gateways would become the central focus of geopolitical conflict. Consider what one nation could do with exclusive access to a functioning gate. If the gates connect to other points in space, instantaneous travel becomes possible, rendering borders meaningless. If they connect to other times, the implications for causality and history itself become nightmarish. If they connect to other dimensions where physics operates differently, access to energy sources or materials beyond Earth's limitations becomes reality. The nation controlling such technology would have ultimate strategic advantage. All others would become subordinate by default. The balance of power that has prevented major conflict through mutual deterrence would collapse. Cooperation would give way to desperate competition. Peace would become impossible. This is why secrecy becomes necessary in the conspiracy theory framework. Not to control humanity or suppress knowledge for power's sake, but because disclosure would guarantee catastrophe. The truth about the gates would trigger religious war, geopolitical conflict, and societal breakdown. Better to keep the secret, even at the cost of lying to populations, than to risk the collapse of civilization. But secrecy on this scale requires extraordinary coordination. Intelligence agencies must cooperate across national boundaries. Political leaders must be either informed and complicit, or kept ignorant and managed. Scientific research must be directed away from questions that might independently discover evidence of the gates. Archaeological sites must be controlled. Leaks must be contained or discredited. This level of conspiracy should be impossible to maintain. 2. Many people would need to be involved. Someone would talk, evidence would emerge, the truth would surface. And yet, according to believers in the theory, the conspiracy persists precisely because it must. Because the alternative to successful secrecy is chaos. There is precedent for governments keeping secrets from their populations. Nuclear weapons programs were developed in total secrecy. Intelligence operations remain classified for decades. Technologies are developed and deployed without public knowledge. If secrets about weapons and operations can be kept, why not secrets about ancient gateways? The counter-argument is scale. Weapons programs involve thousands of people, but they are confined to specific locations and time periods. The gate conspiracy would require coordination across generations, across nations, across decades of potential leaks and independent discoveries. The probability of maintaining such secrecy approaches zero, unless the secret is protected not just by classification, but by the fact that revealing it would destroy the revealer as well. If disclosure triggers societal collapse, then everyone who knows the truth has personal investment in keeping it hidden. Military personnel protect it, because their families live in the civilization that would be destroyed. Politicians protect it because their power depends on governmental stability. Scientists protect it because their institutions require functional society. The conspiracy becomes self-maintaining, not through threats or control, but through shared understanding that some knowledge is too dangerous for general awareness, that humanity as a whole is not ready for certain truths, that protecting the secret, even through deception, is an act of care rather than malice. This is the darkest aspect of the theory. Not that powerful institutions conspire against populations, but that they might be right to do so, that the truth really could destroy us, that ignorance, in this one case, might be preferable to knowledge. The gates remain sealed, the sites remain guarded, the truth remains classified, and the world continues in ignorance, perhaps because ignorance is the only way forward. Epilogue. The gate remains somewhere beneath the sands of the Middle East. If the conspiracy theory is true, lies a structure that predates recorded history, circular, silent. covered in symbols that describe destinations human minds can barely conceive. It has been buried for thousands of years. It has been found, studied, activated briefly, and sealed again. Military personnel stand guard above it, rotating through assignments they don't fully understand. Scientists occasionally arrive to conduct measurements, document properties, attempt to answer questions that grow more complex with each investigation. Politicians in distant capitals receive classified briefings about its existence and periodically debate what should be done about it, but mostly it waits. The gate does not corrode. It shows no signs of age beyond the layers of earth that accumulated above it through millennia. Whatever power source it uses, if it uses one, does not diminish. It remains as functional as the day it was built, ready to activate if the proper sequence is entered, ready to open pathways that should not exist. And according to some theories, it is not alone. References in ancient texts suggest multiple gates, placed at significant locations around the world. If one exists in Iraq, others might lie beneath sites in Egypt, Peru, Cambodia, anywhere ancient civilizations describe doorways to the heavens or connections between worlds. Perhaps all gates lead to the same place. Perhaps each opens to a different destination. Perhaps they form a network, an ancient transportation system built by and for beings who saw Earth as just one location among infinite possibilities. If so, finding one gate means nothing. The network exists, the pathways remain. The question is not whether the gates are real, but whether humanity will ever be ready to use them. Some argue we never will be. That the gates should be destroyed if possible, sealed forever if destruction proves impossible. That whatever lies beyond them is too dangerous for contact. That humanity should develop naturally, without shortcuts through ancient technology we don't understand. Others argue that the gates represent humanity's future, that refusing to use them is like refusing to explore oceans or space. That fear should not prevent investigation, that whatever dangers exist beyond the gates, meeting them is inevitable. Better to do so knowingly, prepared, than to be surprised when something from the other side decides to use the gates in reverse. The debate continues in classified meetings, in secure facilities, among the few who know the truth. No consensus emerges, no clear path forward presents itself, and so the gates remain as they have been, studied but unused, guarded but unexplained, secret but persistent. Occasionally there are incidents, equipment malfunctions, personnel report unusual experiences, measurements detect fluctuations that suggest the gates remain subtly active even when sealed, as if whatever exists on the other side occasionally tests the barrier, checking whether the passage remains closed, waiting for the day when humans finally decide to open it permanently. That day may never come. Humanity might exist for thousands of years more without ever activating the gates, maintaining eternal quarantine of technology we found but did not create. Civilization could rise to heights beyond current imagination without ever stepping through doorways left by our predecessors. Or that day might come tomorrow, a shift in policy, a breakthrough in understanding, an incident that forces the issue. The gates would open, humanity would step through, and whatever exists on the other side would finally meet the latest civilization to discover what has been waiting beneath the sand all along. The gate remains, silent, patient, ready. And somewhere, classified in files that few will ever read, are procedures for what happens if it ever opens again. Protocols for first contact, evacuation plans for nearby populations, authorization chains for weapons that might be used against whatever emerges. Humanity has found the gate, but remains uncertain whether that discovery was fortune or tragedy. Time will tell, or perhaps it won't. Perhaps the secret will persist through generations, through centuries, through the rise and fall of nations. Perhaps the gates will outlast humanity itself, waiting beneath the sand for the next species to excavate ancient sites and discover technology they cannot comprehend. But for now, in this moment, the gate exists, known to a few, studied by specialists, guarded by those who follow orders without full understanding, and above it, the world continues. Wars are fought for resources and ideology. Civilizations rise and interact and sometimes collapse. History moves forward, while beneath the sand the gate waits, just as it has waited for thousands of years, just as it may wait for thousands more, unless we decide to open it, unless we decide we're ready for whatever lies beyond, unless we decide that some doors, once found, demand to be opened regardless of consequence. The choice, according to the conspiracy theory, has already been made. The gate was found. The question now is not whether humanity will use it, but when, and what will happen when we finally do. Before we begin tonight's story, if you're enjoying this content, using your hype points on this video helps the channel more than you possibly know. It makes a real difference in getting these stories out to more people. If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review helps out tremendously as well. And if you feel like it, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're tuning in from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is listening. And of course, if you enjoy these deep dives into the unexplained, hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get into tonight's story. The Dark Forest File. The cursor blinked on my screen at 2:17 in the morning. Outside the window of the government contractor facility, Washington slept under a blanket of sodium lights and paranoia. I was 3 years into a job that had slowly eroded my faith in transparency, cataloguing declassified documents that should have stayed buried. The facility itself was unremarkable, a converted office building in Arlington, the kind of place you walk past 1,000 times without noticing. No signs, no guards at the entrance, just a plain door with a card reader and cameras that watched everyone who entered. Inside, rows of cubicles filled with people like me, contractors with security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. We processed the aftermath of government secrets, the paper trail of decisions made in rooms we would never enter. Most nights were tedious. Agricultural reports from the 1960s, diplomatic cables about long-dead regimes, budget allocations for programs that went nowhere. I had catalogued entire filing cabinets of mundane government waste, thousands of pages that proved bureaucracy was just as boring classified as it was public. But then there were nights like this. Nights when a single folder made me question everything I thought I understood about our place in the cosmos. Nights when I realized that sometimes things are classified not because they are dangerous, but because they are terrifying. The folder was thin, unmarked except for a label that read, Fermi, closed discussion, redacted. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed, no letterhead, just a question, where is everybody? Below it, in what appeared to be a different typewriter, a response, do not pursue this line of inquiry further, and stamped across both, in faded red ink, classified, eyes only. I should have logged it and moved on. That was the protocol. But something about the desperation in that response, the urgency in the stamp, made me dig deeper. What I found in the attached files would change how I looked at the night sky forever. This is the story of why the universe is silent, and why that silence might be the only thing keeping us alive. Chapter 1. The Question That Triggered Alarm Bells. The summer of 1950 was supposed to be a time of scientific optimism. The war was over. America was building the bomb and dreaming of the stars. At Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, some of the brightest minds in physics gathered to push humanity forward. Enrico Fermi was among them, Italian-born, Nobel Prize winner, one of the architects of the atomic age. He was known for his ability to reduce complex problems to simple questions. On a July afternoon, during lunch with colleagues Edward Teller, Herbert York and Emil Konopinski, Fermi posed one of those questions. The group had been discussing recent reports of UFO sightings, joking about flying saucers and alien visitors. The conversation was light-hearted, theoretical, the kind of thing brilliant minds engage in when they need a break from weapons research. The file contained a partial transcript, reconstructed from memory by York years later, declassified only because everyone involved was dead. Teller had apparently made a joke about little green men. Konopinski laughed about the recent sightings over New Mexico, the usual banter, scientists mocking the public's credulity. Then Fermi went quiet. According to the declassified notes, he stared at his sandwich for nearly a full minute before speaking. York's account described the moment. Enrico had this way of going still when he was calculating something, like he had left the room mentally. We kept talking, but I noticed he was not listening anymore. He was thinking. When Fermi finally spoke, his voice was different, not joking, not light. "Where is everybody?" His colleagues laughed. They understood immediately. He was talking about aliens, extraterrestrial civilizations, the statistical probability that in a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars, Earth should not be alone. But Fermi did not laugh with them. York's transcript continues. We expected him to smile, to join the joke, but he just kept staring at the table. Then he started calculating out loud. The calculation was simple, elegant, the kind of back-of-the-napkin math Fermi was famous for. The galaxy is approximately 13 billion years old. Stars with planets have existed for billions of years before Earth formed. Even if intelligent life is rare, even if only 1 in a million star systems develop civilization, there should be thousands of them, millions of years older than us, and a civilization even a few thousand years more advanced than humanity would be visible, obvious, unavoidable. York's account. Herbert said something like, "Maybe they're just too far away." Enrico shook his head. He said, "At 1% the speed of light, you could colonize the galaxy in a few million years. That is nothing. Galactic timescales. Where are they?" The laughter stopped. What the public knows is that this became the Fermi paradox, a philosophical puzzle discussed in university classrooms and science documentaries. The contradiction between the high probability of alien life and the complete absence of evidence for it. What the public does not know is what happened next. According to the file, Fermi's question triggered something. Within 48 hours, he was pulled into a closed-door meeting with military intelligence. No record of the meeting exists in official channels, but the file I held contained handwritten minutes, initialed by someone whose signature had been redacted. The notes were fragmentary, rushed. But the theme was clear. Fermi's question was not abstract. It was tactical. If intelligent life is common in the universe, if the conditions for civilization arise frequently, if millions of years of evolutionary head start exist for countless species across the galaxy, then something should already be here. Some signal, some artifact, some trace of expansion. The absence was not just puzzling, it was alarming. One note read, "Fermi suggests 3 possibilities. 1. We are first. 2. We are rare. 3. Something prevents arrival." Another note in different handwriting, "Option 3 requires immediate assessment." A third note, this one in red pen, "If something prevents arrival, what prevents it? And would it prevent us?" The meeting concluded with a recommendation that the question be contained to theoretical circles, and that public speculation be discouraged. Fermi was asked, according to the notes, to refrain from publishing on this topic. He agreed. The Fermi paradox entered public consciousness anyway, but always as a puzzle, a curiosity, never as a warning. But in the file, someone had written in the margin of those meeting notes, in handwriting that looked hurried and afraid, "He knows, and now we do too." Chapter 2. Early signals that were never public. The next section of the file contained radio logs, dozens of them, dating from the early 1950s through the late 1960s. They came from various facilities: Greenbank in West Virginia, Arecibo in Puerto Rico, classified military listening stations whose locations were redacted. I am not an astronomer. I am a file clerk with a security clearance, but even I could see the pattern. The logs documented anomalies, not the spectacular kind, not the "we found aliens" kind. These were subtler, stranger, more disturbing, repeating periods of structured silence, frequencies that should have shown cosmic background noise instead showing nothing, as if someone had muted specific channels. One detailed report from Greenbank, dated March 1956, described an observation session targeting Tau Ceti, a sun-like star 12 light-years away. The astronomers expected normal background radiation, random noise, the chaos of cosmic static. Instead, for 6 hours they recorded perfect silence on a specific frequency band. Not low noise, not reduced signal, complete absence, as if a wall had been placed between Earth and that particular region of space. The lead observer noted, "Instrumentation checked 3 times, calibration confirmed, pointed antenna at different targets, normal noise resumed, returned to original coordinates, silence returned. No equipment malfunction can explain this pattern." The observation was repeated 2 nights later. Normal cosmic background noise, the silence was gone, signal cut-offs, mid-transmission readings that simply stopped, no fade-out, no degradation, just absence, as if a switch had been thrown. A log from Arecibo, October 1962, documented a received signal at 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line, the frequency astronomers call the universal channel because any technological civilization would monitor it. The signal showed structure, repeating pulses, not natural. The team locked onto it, recording frantically. Duration, 11 minutes, then nothing. The signal did not fade, did not drift in frequency, did not degrade. It stopped, mid-pulse, as if someone had ended a transmission. Attempts to relocate the signal, unsuccessful. Attempts to determine origin point, inconclusive. The direction suggested a region between known star systems, empty space. The report concluded, source unknown, nature unknown, repetition attempt scheduled. The next log entry, 3 weeks later. Follow-up observation negative, no signal detected, region shows baseline noise only. Dead zones in space, regions where radio monitoring detected less activity than probability allowed, areas of the sky that were statistically too quiet. A survey from a classified Air Force listening station, dated August 1964, mapped radio emissions across a section of the galactic plane. Standard procedure. Looking for anything unusual, they found a gap, a region roughly 15 degrees across where signal density dropped to near zero. Not empty space. Stars existed there. Galaxies beyond. But the radio signature was wrong. Too quiet. As if something was absorbing transmissions. The report speculated. Natural explanation unlikely. Interstellar dust can attenuate signals but not eliminate them entirely. Recommend extended monitoring. Extended monitoring lasted 6 months. The gap remained. Then, without explanation, it filled in. Normal signal density returned, as if whatever had been blocking emissions had moved, or stopped. One log entry from May 1958 read, "Observed silence in target region for 72 consecutive hours. No natural explanation. Recommend follow-up observation." The follow-up observation, dated 2 weeks later. Region now shows expected baseline noise. Anomaly unexplained. Surveillance discontinued per directive. What directive? The file did not say. But I found 3 more instances of the same pattern across different years, different facilities, different target coordinates. Silence where there should be noise, then noise where there had been silence, always with the same conclusion: surveillance discontinued. I began to understand that this was not about finding signals. This was about noticing absences. One document, a memo from a NASA contractor dated October 1964, laid it out explicitly. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence assumes contact is desirable. This assumption may be incorrect. We are listening for neighbours. We should be watching for predators. The memo was unsigned. But someone had written in the margin, "This changes the objective entirely." Another note, dated 3 months later, attached to a survey of nearby star systems. If silence is a survival strategy, then broadcasting is suicide. The file included a graph. It showed the detection range of Earth's radio emissions over time. Starting in the early 20th century, a sphere of detectability expanding outward at the speed of light. By 1950, that sphere encompassed dozens of nearby stars. By 1970, hundreds. Someone had drawn a circle around the graph in red ink. Next to it, a single word: exposed. Chapter 3. The Dark Forest Memo. The document was dated March 1961. It was different from the others, typed on different paper, no letterhead, no agency designation, no author name. The typewriter was different too, an older model. The letters slightly faded, as if this had been carbon copied multiple times. Just a title: Dark Forest Hypothesis, Working Theory. The language was cold, clinical, but the implications made my hands shake as I read. The memo began with an analogy. Imagine a dark forest at night. You are armed. You know others are also in the forest. You know they are also armed. You cannot know their intentions. You cannot know if they are hostile or peaceful. You cannot know if they are aware of you. The only certainty is this: making noise reveals your position. And revealing your position may be fatal. In such a forest, what is the rational strategy? Silence, observation, preparation. You do not call out to others. You do not light a fire. You move carefully. You listen. You assume the worst because the cost of assuming the best could be your extinction. The memo continued. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is armed with technology that could threaten others. Every civilization must assume others are armed as well. Communication reveals location. Location invites assessment. Assessment may conclude that eliminating a potential future threat is preferable to risking coexistence. It was the logic of First Strike, extended across light years. The memo outlined the core assumptions in numbered points. Someone had annotated each one in the margins. 1. Survival is the primary goal of every civilization. Margin note: cannot assume altruism scales beyond planetary boundaries. 2. Resources are finite and growth is exponential. Margin note: competition is inevitable. Cooperation requires trust. Trust requires communication. Communication reveals vulnerability. 3. Technological advancement is unpredictable and potentially weaponizable. Margin note: a civilization harmless today may be lethal in 1,000 years. Prevention is safer than reaction. 4. Communication is evidence of capability, and capability is evidence of potential threat. Margin note: the very act of detecting us proves we are advanced enough to be dangerous eventually. 5. The cost of eliminating a distant civilization is lower than the risk of allowing it to advance unchecked. Margin note: especially if the civilization does not know you exist. No retaliation, no moral burden, just survival. The conclusion was stark. In such a universe, silence is the optimal strategy. Broadcasting is a death sentence. The absence of signals is not evidence of absence. It is evidence of fear. The memo then addressed counter-arguments. Someone had thought this through carefully. Counter-argument 1. Advanced civilizations will be peaceful by necessity. Violence is primitive. Cooperation is optimal. Response: this assumes all civilizations follow the same moral evolution. It assumes survival does not favor aggression. It assumes peaceful intent can be verified from light years away. None of these assumptions are safe. Counterargument 2. The universe is large enough for everyone. No need for conflict. Response. Resources may be abundant now, but civilizations expand exponentially. Today's abundance becomes tomorrow's scarcity. Future threat is still threat. Elimination, while still weak, is logical. Counterargument 3. We have not been eliminated yet. Therefore the hypothesis is wrong. Response. Our detectability is recent. Our technology is primitive. We may not be worth the effort yet, or the effort may already be in motion. Lightspeed delay means we would not know until it arrives. I checked the date again. March 1961. The science fiction novel that popularised this idea, that gave it the name Dark Forest, was not published until decades later. Yet here it was, in a government file, written by someone who understood the stakes. Someone had taken the Fermi paradox and turned it into a survival guide. The memo ended with a recommendation: immediate review of all outbound transmissions, assessment of detectability timeline, consideration of broadcast moratorium. This should be treated as a potential extinction-level policy matter. Below that, in handwriting, I was beginning to recognise from the earlier notes: presented to committee, rejected as speculative, but not refuted. And below that, in different handwriting, we are already too loud. The question is whether anyone is listening. Chapter 4. Why we stopped looking so loudly. The shift happened quietly. No public announcement. No policy change that made headlines. But the file documented it clearly. In the early 1960s, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence was optimistic, public, well-funded. Scientists spoke openly about the day we would make contact, about the messages we would send, about the relationships we would build. Then something changed. A series of closed meetings beginning in late 1967. Attendees included astronomers, military advisors, intelligence analysts, and representatives from agencies whose names were redacted. The topic: risks associated with active transmission. The minutes from these meetings showed a stark divide. One camp argued for aggressive searching, broadcasting our existence, sending messages into space. The logic was hopeful. Any civilization capable of receiving our signals would be advanced enough to be peaceful. Contact would benefit humanity. The other camp argued for silence, for listening only, for treating the universe as hostile until proven otherwise. The logic was dark. We know nothing about the intentions of others. We cannot assume benevolence. We should not gamble our survival on optimism. One meeting note captured the debate. Proponent argues that advanced civilizations will be peaceful by necessity. Opponent counters that advanced civilizations will be efficient, and efficiency may favour elimination over negotiation. Another note. Question raised. What if first contact is last contact? The discussions were classified. The public continued to hear about SETI, about radio telescopes searching the stars, about the hopeful quest for cosmic neighbours. But behind the scenes, policy shifted. Funding for active transmission projects dried up. Proposals to send powerful, targeted signals into space were quietly rejected. Scientists who pushed too hard found their grants declined. One memo from 1972 marked internal use only. While passive observation continues, active broadcasting is discouraged pending further analysis of potential risks. This is not a formal prohibition, but a recommended posture. Translation. We are still listening, but we are trying very hard not to be heard. I found meeting notes from a debate in 1974 about the Arecibo message, a powerful radio signal aimed at a globular cluster 25,000 light-years away. Some saw it as a historic moment. Others saw it as a catastrophic mistake. One scientist, name redacted, argued, "We are children playing with matches in a dry forest. We do not know what is out there. We should not announce ourselves until we do." The transmission went ahead anyway. 3 minutes of broadcast, a message in binary describing Earth, humanity, our location in the galaxy. But in the file, someone had attached a note to the report about the transmission. First and last of its kind. No further active transmissions approved. We sent one message into the dark forest. Then we went silent. Not because we stopped looking, but because someone, somewhere, decided that looking back might be worse. Chapter 5. The civilizations that should exist but don't. The file included astronomical survey data, decades of it, observations of nearby star, systems, spectral analysis of distant galaxies, searches for megastructures, for artificial signatures, for any sign that intelligent life had expanded beyond its homeworld. The results were comprehensive and empty. No Dyson spheres surrounding stars, no transit signatures suggesting artificial constructs, no heat blooms from waste energy on a civilization-wide scale, no evidence of stellar engineering, no signs of galaxy-spanning empires, nothing. One report, dated 1983. Survey of 42 candidate systems within 50 light-years shows no anomalous energy signatures, no artificial structures detected, no evidence of technological civilization. Another, from 1991. Extended survey of 300 systems shows baseline stellar evolution. No deviations consistent with large-scale engineering. A third, from 2005. Galactic survey complete. No evidence of Type 2 or Type 3 civilizations in observable sample. Statistical models suggest we should detect multiple examples. Observed count, 0. This was the heart of the Fermi paradox. Statistically, the galaxy should be full of life, full of civilizations, some younger than us, some millions of years older, and the old ones, the truly ancient ones, should be visible, obvious, unavoidable, but they were not there. The file proposed an explanation, not the only explanation, but one that fit the data. A document titled Filter Hypothesis, Alternative Model laid it out. Assumption. Technological civilizations arise frequently. Assumption. Expansion is energetically favourable and therefore likely. Assumption. No observed expansion despite sufficient time. Conclusion. Something prevents expansion before it becomes visible. The document continued. Candidates for prevention. Self-destruction. Civilizations destroy themselves before achieving interstellar capability. Resource collapse. Civilizations exhaust their environment and collapse. Transcendence. Civilizations move beyond physical forms we can detect. Predation. Civilizations are eliminated by external forces. Someone had circled predation and written in the margin, only option that explains both silence and absence. If civilizations destroyed themselves, we would see ruins, energy signatures from dead worlds, debris fields, something. If they transcended, we would see the transition, the shedding of physical infrastructure, the dimming of stars as they were no longer harvested. But we saw nothing, as if civilizations that grew too visible simply stopped existing. The file included a chilling statistical analysis, a graph showing the probability of detecting an expanding civilization over time. The curve climbed steadily. After 1 million years, detection probability approached near certainty. After 10 million years, it was statistically impossible for an expanding civilization to remain hidden. Yet, we detected none. The analysis concluded. Either we are alone, or visibility is fatal. Given the statistical improbability of being alone, the second option must be considered seriously. Below that, in now familiar handwriting, they are out there. We cannot see them because they are hiding, or because they are gone. Chapter 6. The Predator Hypothesis. This section was heavily redacted. Black bars across entire paragraphs. Sentences cut off mid-thought. Whole pages reduced to fragments and shadows. But enough remained to understand the theory, and to fear it. The hypothesis was simple and terrifying. The universe may contain what the file called enforcement civilizations. Ancient, powerful, silent. Their purpose? To prevent the rise of potential threats, not conquerors, not empires building territory, something colder, something more efficient, gardeners, pruning the galaxy. The logic was laid out in fragments. An old civilization faces a problem. Young civilizations are unpredictable. Their technology advances rapidly. Their intentions are unknown. Their growth is exponential. They may become hostile. They may expand aggressively. They may develop weapons that threaten even ancient powers. Consider, a civilization 1 million years old has already solved the challenges we struggle with. Energy, resources, survival. They have had 1 million years to refine their technology. 1 million years to explore. 1 million years to observe younger species rise and fall. What would such a civilization fear? Not weapons, not war. Those threats are manageable with sufficient technology. What they would fear is unpredictability. The chance that a young species might develop something unexpected, something dangerous, something that threatens the established order. Solution: monitor emerging civilizations. Eliminate those that become detectable before they become dangerous. Not out of malice, out of self-preservation, out of cold, calculated risk management. Result: the galaxy remains quiet. The visible are removed, the invisible survive, and the old civilizations continue, unchallenged, for millions of years. The file referenced historical patterns on Earth. Empires that eliminated rival city-states before they became threats. Colonial powers that destroyed indigenous societies when they showed signs of technological advancement or unified resistance. Not because the empires were evil, not out of hatred, because they calculated that prevention was safer than coexistence, cheaper than future conflict, more certain than diplomacy. The Mongols destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire not because it had attacked them, but because it might. Rome salted Carthage not because Carthage was currently dangerous, but because it could become dangerous again. European colonizers eliminated advanced indigenous civilizations not because they were immediate threats, but because they represented potential future challenges. Now scale that logic to a galactic level, to timescales measured in millennia, to power differentials beyond comprehension. One partially redacted passage. A civilization 1 million years older than humanity would possess technology indistinguishable from redacted. The energy cost of eliminating a planet would be redacted. The moral calculus would be redacted, approximately 7 lines. The decision would be redacted, calculated in redacted, and executed with redacted. Whatever filled those blanks terrified the person who wrote this document. Terrified them enough to classify it beyond what I was cleared to read. Another section described potential mechanisms, methods an advanced civilization might use to eliminate a target while maintaining deniability, while leaving no evidence, while appearing to be natural catastrophe. Kinetic impactors, asteroids redirected at relativistic speeds, accelerated over years using minimal undetectable thrust. Impact velocity high enough to sterilize surface, appear completely natural, appear as if the target civilization was simply unlucky, no evidence of artificial intervention, no way to prove otherwise. The math was included. An asteroid 10 kilometers across, accelerated to 10% the speed of the light over 50 years, impact energy equivalent to redacted nuclear weapons, sufficient to redacted, detectability, only during final approach, response time, insufficient. Biological agents, tailored pathogens designed to target specific biochemistry, delivered via microprobes, released into atmosphere or water supply. Extinction within, redacted, 1 line heavily redacted. Natural mutation and disease outbreaks already occur, artificial disease indistinguishable from natural if designed properly, no evidence of external cause. Stellar manipulation, induced instability in target star, methods, redacted, full paragraph. Result, stellar output increases, planet experiences runaway greenhouse effect, biosphere collapses, civilization ends, appears as natural stellar evolution. Astrophysicists might note anomalies but would attribute to rare but natural processes. Each method had the same characteristics: deniability, distance, patience. No need to land troops, no need to negotiate, no need to risk anything. Just observe, calculate, act, and move on. The file included a list of historical extinction events on Earth: mass die-offs with no clear cause, sudden climate shifts, bombardments from space, the Permian extinction, 250 million years ago. 90% of species died. Cause: debated. Volcanic activity, asteroid impact, methane release. No consensus. The Cretaceous extinction, 66 million years ago. Dinosaurs ended. Cause: asteroid impact. But the asteroid timing was statistically unusual. Why did such a large impact occur exactly when dominant species had reached their peak? The Younger Dryas cooling. 12,800 years ago. Rapid temperature drop. Megafauna extinction. Human populations crashed. Cause: debated. Comet impact. Volcanic activity. Ocean current disruption. Someone had written next to the list: how many of these were accidents? How many were probability? How many were intervention? And below that, in different handwriting: if enforcement exists, Earth has been sterilized at least 3 times. We are just the latest attempt, and we may not be the last. The hypothesis concluded with a grim assessment. If enforcement exists, it operates on scales we cannot observe and timelines we cannot predict. Detection would require technological capability we do not possess. Response would require defensive technology we cannot imagine. We may be monitored now. We may be evaluated. We may be scheduled for removal. The criteria for elimination are unknown: detectability, expansion, technological capability, aggressive behaviour. Any or all of these may trigger response. Or we may simply not matter yet, until we do. Below that, a handwritten note that looked like it was added years later, the ink slightly faded. Checked archive for unexplained astronomical events. Multiple instances of stellar activity near systems with confirmed exoplanets. 19 cases between 1972 and 1998, where stars showed sudden brightness variations. No natural explanation satisfactory, all dismissed as instrument error or natural phenomena. But the pattern fits what enforcement might look like from a distance. And below that, more recent, in blue ink, cross-referenced with radio survey data, 7 of 19 systems previously showed possible artificial signals. After stellar events, silence, could be coincidence, could be civilization ending, no way to distinguish. And one final note, this one in pencil, barely legible. We might already be on the list. We might be in the queue, waiting our turn. Chapter 7. Earth becomes detectable. The timeline was clinical, dates and distances, but reading it felt like watching a countdown to midnight. 1895, Marconi develops radio, early experiments, low power, undetectable beyond Earth's atmosphere. 1920, commercial radio broadcasting begins, signals leak into space, detectable within a few light years. 1939, high-power radar developed for military use. Detection range expands to dozens of light years. 1945, nuclear detonations, Trinity test, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, brief but intense gamma signatures, detectable across hundreds of light years. 1950, Earth's radio bubble encompasses multiple star systems. We are visible. The file included a map, a sphere centered on Earth, expanding outward. Each circle marked with a date and a number, the count of star systems within detection range. 1930, 12 stars. 1950, 74 stars. 1970, 218 stars. 2000, thousands of stars. Hundreds of potentially habitable systems. Today, a sphere over 100 light-years in radius, containing millions of stars. We have been shouting into the void for over a century. Someone had drawn a red X over several star systems on the map. Next to it, candidate observer locations, statistical probability of detection, high. The file included an analysis of our most detectable moments. Early television broadcasts, continuous low-level noise, military radar, high-power pulses, detectable signatures, nuclear testing, gamma-ray spikes, unambiguous artificial origin, deep space communication, Voyager, Pioneer, Arecibo message, deliberate transmissions. Each event made us more visible, more obvious, more unmistakably artificial. A margin note, handwritten, shaky. We went from invisible to screaming in less than a century. In cosmic terms, we just turned on a spotlight and started waving. Another note. If enforcement exists, they now know we are here. The question is not if they are coming. The question is when. The file included a calculation. Transit time for a probe travelling at 10% light speed. From the nearest star system where we would be detectable to Earth. 43 years. From a system 100 light-years away. 1,000 years. But those numbers assumed they were not already watching, that they had not already positioned observers, that they needed to travel from home. A final note at the bottom of the timeline. We assume detection means travel time plus decision time, but what if detection means activation time? What if they are already here, waiting? Chapter 8. The Watchers. This section was marked speculative, insufficient evidence, but it was also the longest section in the file, and the most heavily annotated, multiple hands, multiple years, as if different analysts kept returning to it, adding observations, circling patterns. It documented anomalies, objects and events that did not fit standard explanations, not proof, not confirmation, just patterns, the kind of patterns that make you wonder if you're seeing connections or inventing them. The file began with a list of objects of interest. 1960, Black Knight satellite rumours, officially debunked as space debris and camera artefacts. But the file contained telemetry data I had never seen in public sources. Data showing an object in polar orbit during a period when no nation had launched polar satellites. Unusual trajectory, highly eccentric, no known launch vehicle, no decay pattern consistent with debris. Signal emissions were detected by a tracking station in California. Encrypted, repeating, source unknown. Duration 3 days. Then silence. The object remained in orbit for 6 weeks, then disappeared. No re-entry signature, no debris field. One day it was there, the next day it was gone. A handwritten note. Retrieval, departure, equipment failure, unknown. 1973. Detected object in asteroid belt. Trajectory, inconsistent with natural orbit. Observed by a classified deep space tracking system for 6 months. The object appeared to be maintaining position relative to a specific point in space, not orbiting the sun, not following ballistic trajectory, holding position. Attempts to image it, unsuccessful, too small or too dark or too far. But radar returns confirmed something was there. Size estimate between 10 and 50 meters. Shape, elongated. Albedo, unusually low, as if designed not to reflect light. Then, in December 1973, it accelerated. Gentle thrust. Consistent application over 2 weeks. Not chemical propulsion. No thermal signature. No exhaust plume. Just steady, impossible acceleration. Final trajectory took it out of the solar system. Velocity at last observation, 0.03 the speed of light. An annotation in the margin. Natural object does not accelerate like this. No known technology can achieve this. What did we just watch leave? 1991. Near-Earth object with albedo inconsistent with known asteroid composition. Designated 1991 VG. Passed within lunar orbit. Official explanation. Small asteroid on unusual trajectory. But the file contained spectral analysis. The object's surface reflected light in a pattern not consistent with rock, ice, or metal. It reflected like ceramic, like composite material, like something manufactured. Size, approximately 10 meters. Shape, cylindrical. Rotation, tumbling. but the tumble rate changed during observation, as if something inside was shifting mass, or reorienting. It did not return. Last trajectory suggested it would take a solar orbit lasting decades, but when astronomers looked for it on predicted return dates, nothing appeared. Gone. Like it never existed. 2017. Oumuamua. Official explanation: interstellar asteroid. First confirmed object from outside our solar system. Shape: elongated, tumbling. Outgassing as it passed the sun. The file contained alternate analysis. Classified study by a team whose names were redacted. The study questioned everything. The shape was wrong. Too elongated. Statistical models suggested such extreme shapes should be rare. Yet the first interstellar object we ever detected just happened to be the weird one. The trajectory was wrong. Non-gravitational acceleration detected, officially attributed to outgassing. But the outgassing model required specific composition and specific orientation. Both unlikely. The tumble was wrong. Objects tumbling in space typically settle into rotation around their axis of greatest inertia. Oumuamua did not. It tumbled chaotically, as if multiple forces were acting on it, as if it was not a simple rock. The study concluded, natural origin cannot be ruled out, but probability is low. Recommend extended observation. Extended observation was impossible. Oumuamua was moving too fast. It passed through our solar system in weeks. By the time funding was allocated for follow-up, it was already gone. Fading, unreachable. A note at the bottom of the report. Convenient timing, discovered late, lost early, as if it did not want to be studied. Each entry included the phrase, insufficient data for conclusion. But taken together they suggested something. Presence, observation, surveillance. The file included a separate section on signals, radio emissions that appeared briefly then disappeared, always from unusual locations, always without clear origin. One report, October the 1982, signal detected from region near Lagrange Point 2, Earth-Moon Lagrange 2, the gravitational balance point behind the Moon, a natural position for a satellite, except we had no satellites there. Frequency, 1420 MHz. The hydrogen line again. Duration, 42 seconds. Modulation pattern suggested digital data. Decryption impossible. Source triangulation attempted. Results indicated origin was indeed near Lagrange 2. Distance from Earth, approximately 400,000 kilometers. No known satellite at that location. No launches scheduled. No debris catalogued. Attempts to reacquire signal, unsuccessful. Follow-up observations, negative. Whatever transmitted was either gone or silent. Another report from March 1997. Reflected radar signature from object not in tracking database. Object appeared during routine space debris survey. Orbital characteristics unusual. Altitude, geostationary. But position was not one of the standard satellite slots. The object appeared to maintain position relative to Earth for 17 days. Perfect station keeping. No visible propulsion, no thermal signature. Then, on day 18, it was gone. No orbital decay, no re-entry, no debris. Simply absent from all tracking systems. Size estimate based on radar return, approximately 2 meters. Too small for most satellites. Too large for debris. Too stable for uncontrolled object. Assessment, unknown. Possibly classified asset from domestic or foreign program. Possibly equipment error. Possibly other. That last word. Other. Written in the clinical language of government analysis. But meaning something no one wanted to state directly. These were not alien spaceships. Not flying saucers. Not visitors. They were shadows. Hints. Possibilities. But the pattern was there. Objects in positions useful for observation, signals from locations that made no sense, brief appearances followed by vanishing, as if someone was watching and trying not to be seen. The file included a memo from an unnamed analyst. If we assume the enforcement hypothesis is correct, what would surveillance look like? Answer: Minimal profile, passive observation, automated systems, no contact, no evidence, just watching. And if we search for such surveillance, what would we find? Answer: almost nothing. Occasional anomalies, objects we cannot explain, signals we cannot source, but never proof. This is consistent with what we observe, the memo continued. Recommendation: maintain awareness of unexplained objects near Earth. Track patterns. Do not dismiss anomalies as error or natural phenomena without thorough analysis. We may be monitored. We should know if we are. Someone had written in the margin, if they are watching, they are waiting. For what? And below that, for us to become a threat, or for authorization to remove one. Chapter 9. Why the public never heard this. I found myself wondering as I read deeper into the file why none of this had leaked. Why the world did not know. Why we still talked about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence with hope instead of fear. The answer was in a memo dated January 1976. Subject line: Public Disclosure Analysis, Dark Forest Hypothesis. The memo laid out the reasoning. Scenario: Public disclosure of enforcement hypothesis. Likely reactions: panic, loss of faith in space exploration, demand for defensive measures that do not exist, conspiracy theories, accusations of government cover-up, erosion of institutional trust, fatalism. If elimination is inevitable, why plan for the future? Why invest in progress? Geopolitical instability. Nations may pursue aggressive space militarization, arms race in orbit. The memo continued. Benefits of disclosure. None identified. Public cannot alter detectability. Earth's radio signature already propagated. Public cannot defend against hypothetical threat. No technology exists. Public cannot contribute to solution. Problem operates on timescales beyond human policy. Conclusion. Disclosure offers no benefit and significant risk. Information should remain classified pending development of actionable response capability. In other words, telling people would cause harm and would not help. So silence was the ethical choice. A handwritten note at the bottom: we are protecting them from knowledge they cannot use. Is that mercy or cowardice? The file included a secondary analysis. What would happen if the hypothesis was wrong? If we disclosed and it turned out the universe was empty or benign? The answer: institutional credibility destroyed, public trust shattered, for nothing. So the policy became, if the threat is real, disclosure will not save us. If the threat is not real, disclosure will harm us. Either way, silence wins. One final memo, dated much later, 2008. Review of disclosure policy. Recommendation: maintain classification. Public discourse on Fermi paradox and dark forest theory now exists in academic and science fiction circles. Allowing public to treat this as speculation is preferable to confirming it as assessed threat. We were allowed to wonder, to theorize, to write novels, but never to know that someone somewhere in a government facility took it seriously enough to classify it. Chapter 10. The Choice. The final section of the file was not analysis, not data, not redacted paragraphs. It was a recommendation, written in 1989, updated in 2003, reviewed in 2014. The language was formal: assessment of threat level, unknown but potentially existential. Timeline for threat manifestation, unknown, could be immediate, could be centuries, could be never. Available response options, none sufficient. Recommended posture, strategic silence and reduced detectability. The recommendation outlines specific actions. Discontinue active broadcasting except where scientifically necessary. Monitor outbound signals for unnecessary leakage. Develop low-profile communication technologies. Delay deployment of high-energy space infrastructure. Maintain passive observation programs. Avoid provocative demonstrations of technological capability. In simple terms, stop shouting, stay quiet, hope we are not noticed. But the recommendation acknowledged the problem. Earth's radio signature, already propagated over 100 light-years, cannot be recalled. Detectability is permanent. Strategy is damage limitation, not prevention. We had already made the mistake. Now we were trying to avoid making it worse. The final page of the file was a single paragraph. No classification marking, no signature, just a statement. In a universe where survival favours silence, the most dangerous sound is hello. We have said hello, we cannot unsay it, we can only wait to see if anyone responds, and hope that silence means safety, not preparation. Below that, in pencil, barely legible. 20 years since last review, still silent, still waiting. I looked at the date on that note. It was recent. Within the last 5 years, someone was still watching this file, still updating it, still waiting. Epilogue, the sound that ends everything. I closed the file, logged it, returned it to the archive. The process was automatic, mechanical, muscle memory from 3 years of doing this job, but my hands were shaking. The mouse cursor wandered across the screen as I tried to click the confirmation button. Outside the window, the lights of Washington glowed against the darkness. 3:30 in the morning now. The city never truly sleeps, but it quiets. Fewer cars, fewer lights in office windows, just the constant hum of a government that operates in shifts, in shadows, in classified facilities like this one. Satellites passed overhead. Invisible to me, but I knew they were there. GPS satellites broadcasting timing signals, communication satellites relaying phone calls and internet traffic, weather satellites imaging cloud patterns, military satellites doing things I would never know about, a constant stream of radio noise leaking into space. We had not stopped broadcasting, we had only stopped doing it on purpose. But the difference did not matter, not to anyone listening. I thought about the timeline in the file, the sphere of detectability, growing every second, expanding at the speed of a light, a bubble of electromagnetic noise with Earth at the centre. Right now, at this moment, that bubble was passing through new star systems, new potential observers, new possible enforcement civilizations. They were learning about us, learning that Earth exists, learning that we have technology, learning that we are here, and we could not take it back, could not recall the signals, could not hide what we had already broadcast. The radio waves from our first transmissions were already over 100 light-years away. They would keep going, forever, a permanent announcement of our existence. I thought about the enforcement hypothesis. Ancient civilizations, patient, efficient, watching for threats, removing them before they become problems, not with armies, not with invasion fleets, with asteroids, with diseases, with stellar manipulation, methods that leave no evidence, methods that appear natural, methods that allow them to maintain their silence while ensuring ours. How long does it take, I wondered? How long between detection and action? If they are 10 light-years away, 20 years minimum, 10 for our signals to reach them, 10 for whatever they send to reach us. If they are 100 light-years away, 200 years. We might already be dead before the response arrives. Our grandchildren might be the ones who pay for our broadcasting. Or maybe they are closer. Maybe they are already here, watching, waiting. Automated systems left in our solar system millennia ago, monitoring for the emergence of intelligent life, reporting back to civilizations so distant we could never reach them, never respond, never negotiate. I thought about the anomalies, the unexplained objects, the brief signals, the patterns that might be surveillance, or might be nothing, the Black Knight satellite, Oumuamua, the signals from Lagrange points, the radar contacts that appeared and vanished, objects that did not behave like rocks or debris or human spacecraft. Were they watching us? Were they taking notes? Were they sending reports back to whoever or whatever deployed them? Assessment. Technological civilization detected. Radio emissions confirmed. Nuclear capability confirmed. Space exploration initiated. Threat level pending evaluation. And somewhere, light years away, something receives that report. Something decides. Something acts. Or maybe we are safe. Maybe we are too primitive to matter, too far from any enforcement civilization to be worth the effort, too insignificant to threaten anyone. But for how long? Every year we advance. Every year we launch more satellites, build more powerful transmitters, expand our presence in space. Eventually we will matter. Eventually we will cross whatever threshold they use to define threat, and we will never see it coming. The file offered no answers, only possibilities, only fear dressed up in bureaucratic language and classified stamps. But one thing was certain. In a universe where survival favours silence, we are the loudest voice in the room, and someone, somewhere, might be listening. Not with curiosity, not with welcome, not with the desire for contact or communication or cultural exchange, with assessment and patience, the kind of patience that measures time in millennia, that watches stars form and die, that observes species evolve and go extinct, that waits for the perfect moment to act. When the target is developed enough to be worth eliminating, but not developed enough to defend itself, we went from invisible to undeniable in a single century, 100 years, a blink in cosmic time. We built radio, we built radar, we split the atom and announced it to the universe with gamma-ray bursts. We sent signals into space with our coordinates, our biology, our languages, our location in the galaxy. We did this without knowing if anyone was listening, without asking if we should, without considering that maybe the silence of the universe was not because we were alone. Maybe it was because everyone else had learned to be quiet. And now it is too late to take it back, too late to go silent, too late to hide. The sphere of detectability expands, the signals propagate, the evidence of our existence spreads across the galaxy at the speed of light, an expanding shell of proof that Earth exists, that humanity exists, that we are here. And somewhere, in the dark forest, something might have heard us. I shut down my workstation, locked my desk. The security guard at the exit nodded as I scanned my badge. He had no idea what files I had been reading, no idea what I had learned, no idea that the ceiling above us, the sky above that, the space above that, might not be empty, might be full of observers, patient, silent, waiting. The metro was nearly empty at this hour. I sat in a car by myself, watching the tunnel walls blur past, thinking about all the people asleep in the city above, all the people who would wake up tomorrow and go about their lives, working, shopping, falling in love, raising children, planning futures, never knowing that our future might not be ours to plan, never knowing that our continued existence might be a temporary condition, a grace period, a gap between detection and response. I got off at my stop, walked home through streets lit by LED lights that leaked photons into space, past houses with Wi-Fi routers broadcasting signals that added to Earth's electromagnetic signature, past cell towers transmitting conversations that became part of our announcement to the universe. We could not stop, could not go dark. Our civilization was built on communication, on connection, on broadcasting, the very things that might kill us. I reached my apartment, climbed the stairs, unlocked the door. Inside, everything was as I had left it, normal, safe, ordinary. But I looked at it differently now. The wireless router blinking in the corner, the cell phone on the charger, the laptop connected to the internet. All of them talking, all of them adding their small contribution to Earth's voice, all of them making us louder. I went to the window, looked up at the sky. The city's light pollution washed out most of the stars, but I could see a few bright points in the darkness. Were they looking back? Were they cataloguing us? Filing reports? Making recommendations? Civilization detected? Technological advancement confirmed? Expansion capability emerging? Recommendation, monitor, or recommendation, eliminate. I pulled the curtain closed. The file is returned to the archive. The lights in the facility dim. Another night shift ends. The analyst goes home, the building locks, the secrets stay buried. But outside, the satellites keep broadcasting, the telescopes keep watching, the cell towers keep transmitting, the signals keep radiating into space, a constant stream of evidence, a permanent announcement, We cannot stop, we cannot hide. We're already too loud. We can only hope that silence means no one is home, and not that everyone is hiding for the same reason we should be. The dark forest is vast, filled with predators we cannot see, filled with civilizations that learned long ago that survival requires invisibility. And we just announced our location, shouted it, broadcast it on every frequency we could generate. Now we wait to see if anyone shouts back, or if the response comes without warning, without sound, without mercy, just silence, the final, permanent kind. The kind that has swallowed every other civilization that made the same mistake we did. The kind that might be coming for us right now, crossing the void, moving at a fraction of the light speed, patient, unstoppable, inevitable. And we would never know until it arrived, till the sky lit up with something falling, until the assessment became action, until the dark forest claimed another voice. I turned off the lights in my apartment, but outside the city glowed. The satellites transmitted, the radio towers broadcast. Earth kept shouting into the dark forest, and somewhere maybe something was listening, taking notes, making plans, waiting for the right moment.